In this video, I'm going to introduce to you guys one of the most popular programs that is being used in the film industry today. It's called Mari. This program here, you could download it for free, student version. You guys go to google.com, just type in Mari, student version, and you could download it here. Yeah, so it's a awesome 3D painting program. It's basically the standard in the movie industry. So you guys could download it if you're a student. Just go ahead and go here and get it now. Very cool program. Allows you to create nice high quality textures. So when you first open Mari, this is what you're gonna see, the interface. I'm gonna talk about how to navigate around Mari, and I'm gonna talk about the user interface, and I'm also gonna go over how to paint, the basics of painting here, how to project images onto the mesh. I'm going to go over masking, how to use adjustment layers, and how to use procedurals here in Mari. Okay, and those are the things that we're going to need to know in order to create professional textures that are going to be usable for rendering in a 3D program. Okay, so when you first open Mari, you're going to see that you're going to see a default project there. And that's already, you could use that to navigate and to play around with it, but we're actually going to be using our own OBJ file. Okay, I have included an OBJ file for you guys in the resource area. It's called SAML_base. So this is what the mesh that we're going to be practicing on. If you already have an OBJ file that you want to put inside here in Mari, you could also use that. If you've modeled something in 3ds Max or Maya, you could just export as an OBJ and import it here in this program. So let's go to File, go to New, and this window will pop up. Okay, we're gonna have to create a name for this, and we're just gonna call it Practice. And for the geometry here, we have to link our geometry that we're gonna use, the OBJ file, and you do that by clicking on this arrow here, and find your mesh that you're gonna be using in Mari. So gonna use the SAML_base OBJ, open. And if you go to channels, by default, Mari is gonna include the base color channel, specular, roughness, and bump. We just need one of these. We're just gonna use the base color channel. All right, we're gonna need just one, just for practicing. And for the texture size, if you have a student version, you can have up to 4096 by 4096, okay? If you have the commercial version, like I do, you could go higher. Of course, the bigger the resolution, the higher quality it will be if you render your character up close, okay? So, but for now, since you guys have the student version, a lot of you guys do not have the commercial, we're just gonna go 4096 by 4096. Color settings, we are using linear workflow for this. For the lighting, Mari uses shaders to specify how different channels behave in the lighting module and how the paint on the model reacts to light. For the lighting, we're just gonna set it to full. We have different types of lighting. We have flat lighting, basic with shadows, full with shadows, full. Let's just set it to full. Active light count is 4, is fine. And let's go ahead and create new project. And just wait for a little bit. This might take some time depending on your mesh, how much geometry, how much polygons you have there. And there you go. Now I want to go over the user interface for a bit. In here, you will see the menus of Mari, okay? You have the regular file menu where you can generally create a new project, open, save, edit, undo, the preferences. You have selection, you could select, hide stuff here. You have the objects where you could duplicate, you could remove object, add object. Channels, all related to how you're gonna modify the channel. You could remove, add channels here, unlock channels. You have layers, anything that you could do with the layers where you could cut, copy, paste layers, remove layers, add new layers, masking, export. And anything related to patches are here. p-text, shading, painting. So this is all basically all logical. Anything that are related to these specific names can all be found here in the menu area. Okay, and we also have some toolbars here. Okay, these are the toolbars of Mari. So here where you could create a new project, where you could close the current project, save the project. So these are toolbars here that you could mess around with. You got the mode where you could basically have layers you're working with, and you could set the blending mode to give you different types of effects. And you have radius, flow, and you could adjust your brush. You can modify how your brush is painting by adjusting the options here in the toolbar. And you have this here that allows you to turn on the wireframe for your mesh, and you could do UV image rendering. You can also toggle on off the whole patch, and you got some camera settings here. You got near, far, and FOV properties that you can fiddle with in regards to the camera. And we also have some tools here that we are going to be using. You have, of course, the selection. Okay, as for select, and you could also paint, basic painting brush for P for paint. And you could also use this here. This one is for projecting images onto the mesh, onto the canvas. And then we have a warp tool here where we could warp images same as you would in Photoshop. You have different types of tools here for paint buffering. You could have the eyedropper where you could sample a color. And of course you could have a foreground and a background color. Okay, so this here is going to be the foreground, and then you have the background, and you can swap between the two. Okay, and you have set colors to black and white. You could have this here, different types of selection modes, view user shader. You have different types of lighting that you could use. Okay, you could set it to flat, basic, or full. And you have here mirror projection, allows you to mirror the contents of the paint buffer. And you have disable mirror painting, clear paint buffer. I will go over these later. And you also have some options here on the user interface. So you could go and navigate through the cameras using these options here. And you could have the color space, the color management here. So these are tools here that you could use to adjust the color display of your canvas. Now here you're gonna see that we have some palettes. We have the channel palette here, which will allow us to see all the channels that we need. We have the base channel here, and you could also see that we have some windows here that we are looking at. We have the channel. If you click on the channel tab, you could see that we have the base color that we have created when we first started out with our project, when we created a new project. Okay, and the channels settings, you could see the properties for them here. Okay, so we know that we are working on normal. The size is 4K by 4K, 16-bit, and some more options that you could look at here, okay, for the channels tab. And if you go to shaders tab here, we have the current channel, current layer, and current paint target principled BRDF. So it tells us here what shader we are currently using and what it is affecting on our mesh. Okay, and we have objects here. Basically, this is the OBJ file that we are using for our what we are looking at and our canvas here. Okay, so we are using the SAML base, and it also tells you here the name of the file. Okay, and you could even put different types of geometry here, and you could switch in between versions of those geometries. So if you have one geometry you want to import here, you want to import another one, you could switch between the two by adding it here on the version. And I will show you how to do that when we start to begin our project. And we also have here the name. Okay, so we got some information about our objects here. If you go to Object tab, you go Image Manager, this is basically where you're gonna import some images onto your project so that you could project it onto your mesh. Okay, so if you want to project anything, you want to import images, you drop them here. Okay, and yeah, going back to channels. So, and we also have the palettes here. So you could have the channel palette, you have the colors that you could change, you have the history view, image manager, which I went over already, you got the layers that you could show or hide, you got lights, and you got the motor render if you want to use render for moto, node graph. So this is if you want to really go deep into the program and use nodes. You got some node properties. And yeah, if you want to hide the objects tab, you can. If you want to bring it up again, you can. All right, you got the painting. So this painting here, you could adjust the properties for it and it will affect how you are painting on the mesh. And you got the patches palette here, which displays a selectable list of patches in the project. And projectors, Python console, we are not really going to use those. Selection groups and shaders palette, which displays the shader setup. And we have the shelf where we could use like different brushes. Okay, and you could have some snapshots, texture sets, and some tool properties. Okay, now if you could also go to channels now. I like to work when I'm starting out, just go to channels. Okay, and what you could also do is you could customize the layout of this. So let's say you want to drag this toolbar and you want to set it here, you can. And if you want to drag the channel somewhere here on the left, you can do that. Or you could have it floating around, or you could drag it right here. And you could also, if you like, you could minimize the palette and maximize the palette. You could even close out the palette, or you could dock the palette. Now, let's say you want to go back to the default layout of your scene, of your project. You just go to View and Default Layout. So it'll go back to how it was before. Now, how do you navigate here in Mari? Okay, so if you guys look here, there's the Project tab, UV tab, you have Ortho UV, and you have Perspective, and you have Ortho. Okay, now let's go to Ortho. You could go ahead and navigate. You could zoom in, zoom out of your mesh by holding the Alt key and holding the right click button. That will allow you to zoom in, zoom out. If you want to orbit, so you could look at your character all around, you could hold the Alt key and left button and drag, so you could look and navigate and orbit. If you want to pan to the left, pan to the right, pan up and down, hold the Alt key and the middle mouse button and drag. Okay, now you could also rotate this. You could hold Control and R on your keyboard and then left button to rotate. Okay, you could work on either orthographic or you could work on perspective view, which will give you more of a distortion. You could go to Ortho/UV. So what this would do is you could navigate on the orthographic view. At the same time, you could even look here at your UVs. So this mesh is already unwrapped, and there's the UVs for this mesh. So what's really cool about this is you could paint on the orthographic here. You could paint right on the mesh, but you could also paint on the UV here. and you can go to UV and to see just the UV of the mesh. If you go to projects, this shows you the recent project that you have been working on. Okay, so basically I've shown you guys how to navigate, and I'll talk about the user interface here. And those guys are the navigation and user interface of Mari. Now I'm going to show you how to do some basic painting in Mari. To begin painting here, first you need to make sure that your layers window is showing. If you don't see that, make sure that you click on this layers here, the palette. Okay, so if you want to begin painting, you could go on this tool, click and hold. You're gonna see paint, P for paint. You could press P on your keyboard or click here. And right now the color, foreground color is black. If you want to change the color, you could just click here simply, and let's say I want to paint in red, I could do that. I could just choose the color that I want and press OK. Now for working like a pro, very good practice. Good practice for painting is by first creating a new layer so that we could delete that layer anytime that we want. So if you want to create a new layer here, you could just click on this icon here. Click. And so that created a new layer there. Okay. And we could even name this layer. You could double click, and let's say we could call it red paint. Enter. So now what we could do is we could use our paintbrush and start painting on our character, and it will go right on the red paint layer. Now if you paint here and you start to navigate, you see how it's not really staying on the mesh. If you want to make sure that the paint stay there on the mesh, you need to go to painting and you need to click on B for bake. Okay, and so it will bake right on the mesh, and you will see that that painting is still there. You need to go painting and click on clear painting or Control Shift C. So that's a way of manually painting in Mari. If you don't like manually painting here, you could go to the painting option here. Okay, go here, and then you're gonna see some properties for our painting. If you scroll down, you're going to find the projection rollout here. Okay, so click on the projection, and then you're gonna see a bake behavior. Right now it's set to manual, so we could change it to auto, bake, and clear. So what it will do is when you paint, it will automatically bake the paint and it will clear it out so the paint doesn't stay there. So let's go ahead and try that. So if I could just go ahead and change the color for this for now. I want to change it. I want to start painting to blue. Press OK. Okay, so now if I go ahead and start painting here, and if I click on the Alt on my keyboard, it will bake it, and then you could navigate. Okay, so that's usually the way that I paint here. I set the bake behavior to auto bake and clear, so when I paint and I just navigate, it will just go ahead and just bake it right away without me having to Control Shift C or B for bake or Control Shift B. All right, so it's up to you. If you feel like your computer could handle auto bake and clear, then use that bake behavior. But if you feel like your computer is on the slow slide, then you could choose manual. Okay, now you could go ahead and practice painting here. And if you guys go to the shelf right here, all right, so you guys could click on this shelf tab, and if you go to that shelf tab, you could see that there are some brushes that you could use, some basic brushes. You could even have some hard surface brushes, different types of brushes that you could play around with here. So if I go to my organic brush here and I go to Octo Skin, So I have an octo skin that I could paint with, which is pretty nice. So you guys could mess around with the different types of brushes here. You could even bring up the brush size. To bring up the brush size, you could click on the brackets on your keyboard. Bracket to the right makes it bigger. Bracket to the left make it smaller brush size. Okay. So you got some fingerprint there. So you can go with the hard surface brushes. You got some nice hard surface brushes that you could use. So if you are on auto bake, if you're on painting and you have set the bake behavior to auto bake and clear, what you could do is you could, if you paint, you just press Alt on your key. After you paint, you press Alt on your keyboard once, and then you just navigate. Okay. So that's basically what I find easier to paint here. And make sure that if you have lost your layers, that you could always go and click on layers again. Or if you lost your channel, you could always click on channel. Okay. So I usually have those two on, the channel and layers, if I am painting. So yeah, you guys could go ahead and mess around with the different types of brushes that are available here. So you guys could, I think this is pretty nice how you have all these brushes that you could use. And you could always change the color if you need to. And let's say that you want to have another layer here. Let's say you want to have, this is probably could change the name of this because it's no longer red. So I could just change it, paint 1. And let's say that you want to create another layer. You could create a new layer. And this one I could call it paint 2. And on here, you could do another set of painting. So let's say I want to have a green color here for the third layer. Okay, so now I see green on top. And if I want to change the opacity of this, let's say I want to change the opacity of the paint 2 layer so I could see the paint behind that layer, which is paint 1. I just go here, and then you could change the opacity by messing around with the slider here. So I could click and drag to the left. So now if I bring down the opacity, I could see the paint layer behind that paint. Okay. And I could bring it up again. All right. Okay, so that's how you're going to do basic painting in Mari. I suggest that if this is your first time using Mari, go ahead and play around with the paint layer, with the layers here, and mess around with the different types of brushes here that you could use. Okay, different types of brushes. Go ahead and get a hang of this program and paint away. Okay, here I want to show you guys how to import an image in Mari and project that image on the mesh as a texture. First, let's go ahead and delete the layers that we have created here. You can just right click and remove layers. Another way of deleting layers is you could click on the layer and click on the remove layers icon here. And we could just go ahead and create a brand new layer. And let's go ahead and rename that projection. So it's best practice when you want to create a new painting to create in a brand new layer. That way you are working non-destructively and you can delete it anytime with no issue. Okay, so how do you import an image here? How do you import images here in Mari? Okay, you need to go to the image manager here. And then you will see the image manager window. You right click on an empty space here and click on open. And go ahead and find the texture, the image that you want to use. So I have a texture folder here. So I'm gonna be using some images that I found on the internet, and they're both JPEG files. If you look here for the file type, that Mary accepts. These are the type of files that you could import in Mary. Okay, so I have 2 JPEG files that I found on the internet. I'm just gonna go ahead and open. Okay, so I have a ground texture and I also have a sky texture. Let's say I want this here. I want him to have a cloud face. So what I could do is I could just click and drag this onto my character. Click, hold, and drag. Okay, so now you should see the image here. And you could still navigate onto the canvas as you have that photo showing. And if you want to move the photo, you hold the shift on your keyboard and left click and just drag. And you can move the texture anywhere on the canvas. If you want to scale the image, you could Control Shift on your keyboard, Control and Shift together, and left click and drag your mouse. Okay. If you want to rotate the image, you could hold Control and left button and Control left click, drag. Okay, so to move again, once again, hold Shift, left click. You want to rotate, hold Control, left click, and drag. You want to scale the image, you could Control and Shift on your keyboard and left click, drag. Okay. Now, if you want to adjust the opacity of the image so you could see the model behind it, you could go ahead and Shift minus on your keyboard, or Shift plus on your keyboard. Shift minus to bring down the opacity, Shift plus to increase the opacity. Okay. All right. So if you want to go ahead and project this texture on there, you could go ahead and make sure that you are on Paint Through. You could press U on your keyboard or click here. You could just bring up the brush size by clicking on the brackets on the keyboard, bring up the brush size, and you could go ahead and start painting. Okay. Now this is what I have. If you don't want to see the texture anymore, if you don't want to see the image on the character's face anymore, you could just go click here. All right, or you could press S. So you could switch between select and paint through. Now, if you want to go back to the painting the image again, you want to see the image again, you could press U on your keyboard or go to paint through U, and you could begin painting again. So I could, let's say I want to paint the side of the face now. I could do this. And let's say I don't want to see that image anymore. I'm done painting. I'm done projecting. I could press S on the keyboard. All right. And let's say I want to go back and bring back the image again because I want to project on this side here. I press U on the keyboard and begin projecting. Okay, and press S. And let's say I want to bring in a new texture that I want to project here. Okay, so I could create a brand new layer, and I'm going to call this one Projection 2. And for this layer, I want to paint out the ground on the character's face. So I could just click and drag this on here. And remember, if I want to scale, Control Shift, left click and drag. Okay. And I could go ahead and start painting this ground on the character's head, the forehead here. And that ground will be applied, that ground projection will be applied on my Projection 2 layer. And the sky here has been added onto the first projection layer that I have. Okay, and I could press S. There you go. All right. And once again, if I want to adjust the opacity for my Projection 2 layer, I could do that. So now I could see the layer behind this Projection 2 layer, which is the sky. Okay. So that, guys, is how you project textures on your mesh in Mary. Now I want to show you guys how to use procedural layers here in Mari. I think this procedural layers are a pretty nice tool to use if you want to easily create texture and grid patterns there. So if you want to do scales pretty quick, if you want to do some noise or some pores effect, procedural layering is a good way to go. Okay, so how do you create procedural layer? Click here on this icon. It's the add procedural layer icon here. And then you're gonna go to procedural, and then there's different types of procedurals here you could use. We could go ahead and mess around with the noise here. Let's do cellular. Okay, and once you have that, you could see the options, the properties for it right below. Okay, so there's some properties, some settings you could mess around with to modify the look of the cellular layer. So you could go to the size and you could adjust the size to make it smaller or bigger. Okay, so I'm gonna make it smaller so you could see more of the cellular shape. Okay, and you could even change the color of this. There's color A is white, color B is black. I could click on the white, and let's say I want to make it red instead, and then press OK. And let's say for the black part, I want to make it like dark green. Okay, and press OK. And let's say that you want to mask. I want to go over masking with you guys, because you're going to be masking a lot also when you are painting in any program, whether you're using Photoshop, Mari, or Substance Painter. Masking is very, very essential. Okay, so remember, when it comes to masking, black is going to hide the color information, and white will reveal the color information. How do you do masking on the layer here in Mari? Okay, you just right click on the layer that you want to mask, and you go to layer mask, add mask, and you could either reveal all or hide all. Or you can even put an alpha there or create a mask from a selection or from a selection group. But normally we're going to be using either reveal all or hide all. Let's go ahead and click on reveal all. Okay, so everything is showing within this layer. For the cellular layer, the cellular pattern that we have created is showing. So now let's say that we want to hide the color information for some of the parts here for the cellular layer. Okay, first we need to make sure that we are working with black and white. Okay, so look at each of these squares that you have there for the foreground and the background, and make sure that it's black and white. Okay, no color. Okay, so knowing that black is going to hide our color information, right now we are on black. So now if we go to our paint, P for paint, and we start painting here, we start painting, what's going to happen is if we start painting this black, the cellular black here, it's hiding the color information. And then if you switch this to white, so now we're on white, it's going to reveal the color information for our mask, for our layer here that we have selected, that we added a mask on. Okay, so white shows the color information, black hides the color information. Okay, and you could also, instead of pressing here, you could press X on your keyboard so that you could switch between black and white. All right, and another thing that I want to show you guys is going to be the adjustment layer. Okay, you could add adjustment layers here in Mari, same as you would in Photoshop. So if you want to make things brighter, or if you want to make the painting more contrasted, you want to change the hue and saturation, you could do all that here in Mari. So let's say that you want to adjust the brightness of this. Okay, you could right click here and you could add adjustment layer, and we have brightness, we have color balance, we have all these different things that we could adjust for this here. Okay, click on brightness. So now there's a new brightness layer that's been created, and you could look at the settings for the adjustment layer for the brightness here, in which you could modify. So I could increase the overall brightness of this. So let's say I only want certain parts of the character here to be bright, certain parts of the painting to be bright. So what I could even do is I could add a layer mask here on the adjustment layer. I could right click, I could go to layer mask, add mask, and let's say I want to click on hide all. So now the brightness is no longer showing, but I could make certain parts of the adjustment layer show by using the black and white masking here. So right now I'm on white. So now let's say I want to just make the forehead here ultra bright. I could do that because I am on white here, and it's revealing the part of the layer that I want to show. If I set it to black, it will hide it. It will hide the adjustment layer effect. I could even go ahead and change the opacity, adjust my opacity here, bring down the opacity so that it's not so intense, the painting. So I could just slowly add some glowy areas on his face. Okay, I could slowly crank up the opacity if you want to intensify the glow on certain areas. Okay. Okay, so that is how you're gonna add some adjustment layers. You could even add another one, an adjustment layer on top of an adjustment layer. I could right click, adjustment layer, and let's say for this one I want to add like a gamma adjustment layer. And once again, you could see the properties for the gamma right here. Okay, so I could change the gamma settings if I need to. Okay. So pretty cool stuff that you could do in Mari here. Okay. Let's say you are done painting on Mari and you want to export out your file so you could use it in a 3D program like Maya or 3ds Max. You want to be able to assign the texture and a material in one of those 3D programs. So how do you export this out? Go to the very first layer on the top stack here. You right click, export flatten, export all layers flatten. So what that will do is it will merge all these layers as one, so you could export it as one texture file. Okay, so right click, export flatten, export all layers flatten, and then this window will pop up. So you just go ahead and locate the path wherever you want to save the file. And I'm saving it in my documents folder. I created a texture and it's called Mari folder. And for the template, you could see that it has the $sign. It has the word channel.udem, $udem.tiff. If you have a student version, I believe you're limited onto the type of file that you could save here. I have the commercial version, so I can save it as a TIFF file, and you could change the name. So after the first $sign, you could put any name there that you want. I'm gonna call it color map. Okay, and you could leave the $udem.tiff, so you're not gonna have any issues with the file. And for the use template for, just set it to everything. Color space, I'm gonna set it to sRGB. And we could click on export all patches. And then you could wait for a bit and you could see here. You should be able to see whether you're done or not. So it's already done. And now if I go to Photoshop, I could go ahead and check out that texture. Open. And I save it in my Mari folder. And this is how the texture looked like here. So if I assign this texture in Maya or 3ds Max, it will basically look like if I sign it on the mesh on 3ds Max with this object with the OBJ file in 3ds Max. This is how it will look like, the texture. Okay, and there are different ways on exporting out the texture here in Mari. You could right click and export it the way I showed you here, where all the layers will be merged together, or you could export each individual layer here. Okay, so let's say I only want to export out the projection 2 here. All right, only this layer I want to export. I could right click, I could go ahead and go to export selected layer, or I could select more than one layer. I could export selected layer. So all 3 of these textures that are inside this layer will be exported out. Okay, and I could also right click, export flatten, export selected layers flatten. I could do that if I want to select individual, export out individual layers. So you have different ways of exporting it here. Exporting out, you have a lot of flexibility on how you could export out your files here in Mari. So a pretty nice program. I really suggest that you guys get into this. I've shown you guys how to navigate in Mari, how to paint, how to project your images on the mesh, how to do procedural maps, how to do masking and adjustment layers, and how to export out your texture so you could use them. So now you guys have learned the basics of the Mari program.